I mean, in the past year, I've had 3 companies that I started not work out and where I've lost money. And I think when we watch these podcasts and listen to successful, quote unquote, entrepreneurs, they only talk about the good, but they don't talk
Oh
about
yeah.
all the other failures. Like I lost millions of dollars this year from my failures, Eric. And I'm glad that it was millions of dollars spread across many, many different projects, trying to be as lean as possible to de-risk and, fail fast, but it's inevitable. And I think there's this art of how do we get comfort with failure and making mistakes and, making it so that happiness and satisfaction with life is more of a state of mind.
Hmm.
It's more of an internal thing than I need my external world to look a certain way for me to be satisfied.
Welcome back to the Eric Ries Show. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Jess Mah, an extraordinary entrepreneur who built her first 6-figure business while still in middle school and has since co-founded over 10 companies collectively valued at more than $1 billion. This conversation is a little different. Jess opens up and is very candid about her entrepreneurial journey, like dealing with winning a public accolade such as Forbes 30 Under 30, while privately struggling to manage layoffs and severe financial setbacks. She reveals what it's truly like to navigate success and failure simultaneously, highlighting the importance of authenticity and humility. That's what the startup journey is always like. Jess also provides detailed strategies on how she's effectively handled the stress and pressures that accompany success at entrepreneurship. She talks about her unique method of vetting potential partners, her 90-day trial approach to hiring executives, and why a strong, supportive community is crucial to long-term success. We talk about the practical mental health techniques that entrepreneurs need to manage all that stress: meditation, genuine relationships, and creating personal accountability to stay grounded even amid success. I wanted to share her actionable insights on how to build resilient businesses, nurture meaningful relationships, and foster an environment where honesty and transparency create true, authentic success. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Jess Mah.
Well, I thought maybe we'd start. I remember we spent a lot of time together during the pandemic working on various kinds of COVID relief and trying to get, supplies where they were needed and kind of activate philanthropists. It was like a good time if you ignore the fact that the world was falling apart around us. And one of the
Yeah,
things
I
that really
remember
struck
that.
me, yeah, I mean, good times, I guess. But we learned a lot of important lessons that I think have a lot of applicability today. But one of the things that really struck me was the way in which, you've had tremendous success in your life and you've been really open about it, which I really love. Like you don't have that taboo of like trying to pretend otherwise. Like, you've been willing to wear your success publicly. But I think partly because of that reason, or, I'm curious why you think this is, but I've noticed you have a very easy rapport with a lot of very wealthy people. You've been a really, I would say really strong networker, and you've been building up these relationships for a long time. And there's something I've been dying to ask you,
Sure.
which because I also, travel in these circles and meet these people and they're really fascinating characters, but a lot of them strike me as really miserable
Hmm.
despite all their success and wealth and power and luxury and everything. And I maybe the most common thing that when I'm talking to like young aspiring entrepreneurs that like it comes up now that never used to come up 10 years ago or 15 years ago is people see these folks that are like basically having a mental breakdown in public. And they're like, is that what success looks like? So I had to get your take on like, everyone knows that money doesn't buy you happiness, and then we act as if it does anyway. Like,
Yeah,
what's your view about the mental health crisis of our wealthy overlords? Like, what is going on?
I think most people are universally struggling with something, whether you're wealthy or not. I think until I spent a lot of time with super wealthy people, I thought, oh, once you have money, then everything is solved. And what I didn't realize was it solves some problems, but it creates a whole lot of other issues. Like right now, I'm public enough where I'm paranoid about online stalkers and people who are, trying to, just dig on me, right? That's a new problem that I didn't have a few years ago. And I have enough friends who complain about how people take advantage of them now that they know that the world knows that they're wealthy and, they don't have privacy at a restaurant. I mean, you're
Um,
famous, like everyone knows who you are. Everyone knows about Lean Startup and all the content you put out. I'm sure you face similar things. And I think there's this
sure.
adjustment period where you kind of go through that and then the dust settles and it's like, all right, who am I? Like, what do I stand for?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also I've had the gift of having tremendous failures and setbacks along the way. That's probably the best gift. Unlike, say, Mark Zuckerberg, where it was just like straight up to the right. I just had like so many screw ups, lots of businesses that didn't work out. And I think that's really humbled me. And, and like, I mean, in the past year, I've had 3 companies that I started not work out and where I've lost money. And I think when we watch these podcasts and listen to successful, quote unquote, entrepreneurs, they only talk about the good, but they don't talk about all the other failures. Like, I lost millions of dollars this year from my failures, Eric. And I'm glad that it was millions of dollars spread across many, many different projects, trying to be as lean as possible to de-risk and, fail fast, but it's inevitable. And I think there's this art of how do we get comfort with failure and making mistakes and, making it so that happiness and satisfaction with life is more of a state of mind. It's more of an internal thing than I need my external world to look a certain way for me to be satisfied. So anyway, to answer your question, studied so many rich people, all my centimillionaire and billionaire friends, and all my happy friends who didn't have as much money, and noted the differences and made it my intention to have the success while having the happiness of my less successful friends. Which is kind of weird, but like, that's the goal. That's my goal.
This episode is brought to you by Vanta. If you're a startup founder, then product market fit is obviously your number one priority. But to land bigger customers, you also need security compliance. And obtaining your SOC 2 or ISO 27001 certification can open those big doors. But they take time and energy, pulling you away from building and shipping. That's where Vanta comes in. Vanta is the all-in-one compliance solution helping startups get audit ready and build a strong security foundation quickly and painlessly. Through the platform, access trusted experts to build your program, auditors to get you through audits quickly, and a marketplace for essentials like pen testing. So, whether you're closing your first deal or gearing up for growth, Vanta makes compliance easy. Join over 8,000 companies, including many Y Combinator and Techstars startups who trust Vanta. Simplify compliance and get $1,000 off at Vanta.com/Eric. That's VANTA.com/Eric. This episode is brought to you by Explo, which makes customer-facing analytics and data reporting that can be embedded directly in your application. If you've ever gotten customer support requests for dashboards, reports, raw data, you don't have to build it yourself anymore. Enter Explo, a fully white-label embedded analytics solution designed entirely with your customer in mind. Getting started is easy. Explo connects to any relational database or warehouse. All the styling and dashboards are done with low code. And once you're ready, just embed the final product directly into your application with a tiny code snippet. The best part? Explo's AI allows your customers to make their own reports and dashboards themselves instead of burdening customer support. Build and embed a fully white-labeled analytics experience in days. Try it free at explo.co/Eric. That's explo.co/ERIC.
I like that you're so open about it because you're right. I also get recognized walking down the street and have had people like pitch me their startup in the bathroom and all kinds of other weird things. Like it is being a public figure is really quite strange. And I remember, I think it's Bill Murray told a famous joke where he was like, someone came up to him and said, "Hey, can I get your advice? I want to become rich and famous." He said, "Well, why don't you try being rich first and see if that does it for you?" Like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to try being rich? And what I love about that joke now, I mean, when I first heard it was very funny. Now I'm like, yeah, being anonymously rich, that doesn't sound that bad, to be totally honest. But what I think is really fascinating about it also is we have this example of a lot of people who were anonymously rich and they couldn't take it. They've had to make themselves like far more famous to the point where like, I often wonder like, what do they lack that this drive to be more famous and more the center of attention? Like, what is that really about? It's fascinating to me. And so I would love to talk about the things that you feel like have kept you grounded, because I do think, I remember talking to Mitch Kapor one of the fathers of modern computing, and one of the
Yeah.
inventors of the spreadsheet. And those that don't know his incredible track record should look it up. But the first company he ever built was like a rocket ship to end all rocket ships. I can't remember the stats offhand, but like in the first 2 years of Lotus's existence, it was selling just outrageous amounts of money. I think they went public like 3 years. In it was just a very different time and a very different level of success. And he was very candid. He's had a chance to reflect on it. I remember he was very candid with me that success kind of messed him up, because he'd never actually seen any failure, and it goes to your head and it has all these other consequences. So I do think, like, in some ways, you're grounding in your willingness to do stuff that is a failure, to be perceived as a failure, to allow people to admit. Like, think about how many people we know who just cannot admit that they were ever wrong, that they ever failed, they ever made a mistake. Like, I think that leads to a lot of mental health problems. Talk about that, that grounding in the real world and how you feel like that has helped you.
Yeah, I think that going back to that point, my friends who had too much immediate success, they didn't have enough failure along the way. That creates problems, because what comes up oftentimes does come down. And the media likes to build people up and take them down a lot of the time. And in my case, I had lots of, back in 2010, lots of great PR. TechCrunch called me the next Mark Zuckerberg, which was totally undeserved, right? So all this stuff got to my head for maybe a year, and my startup was not working out at all, Eric. It was just terrible. Like, I was bringing in no revenue, didn't have any metrics to justify the valuation that we were bringing.
inDinero, right?
This for inDinero. It was just like a total train wreck. And it took 10 years to grow the company very, very methodically, off angel money, by the way. We were never successful at raising VC money for this company, to the point where it could be employing, 250 people and be profitable. And the gift was, it was a slower growing business that had to be a profitable business, where I had to look at every single expense with a fine tooth comb. And, I was miserable for a lot of my 20s, because I thought, woe is me. All my friends who went through Y Combinator and raised money from Sequoia and all these big flashy VC firms, like, they lucked out and I'm the loser. That was really the narrative in my head. And then I think around COVID, I was able to reframe everything. I was able to flip the script and say, actually, how lucky am I that I didn't have that great success? And that because I didn't have that great success, I had to build genuine friendships, real community, because community keeps us grounded. When we have authentic relationships where people like you for genuinely who I am and not for my success, because I didn't have any success, that there's something nourishing about that. I call them chicken noodle soup friends. It's just like, it just feels cozy inside.
Oh yeah.
And then I actually ended up leaving the Bay Area, spent more time in LA and just hopping around. And I think that also helped give me a new perspective outside of the whole tech echo chamber. And then, finding a meditation practice, working out every day, like the basics that we kind of forget about when we're in the egoic rush of building and trying to make money and have success. I wasn't taking care of myself at all. That was not the priority. And then funny enough, once we take care of ourselves and come back to what actually matters, then success and external stuff naturally works out a lot better. It's just very unfortunate that it often works out that way. Or fortunate, actually.
Fortunate. I guess it depends on your spiritual orientation.
Yeah.
I do think that part of what is driving a lot of people crazy is ego attachment to the thing that they make, so that they really can no longer tell the difference between themselves and the thing that they're trying to build in the world. And therefore, every attack on their company is like an attack on them. Every difficulty that company has, it's like they're going to die. I'm saying they, but I remember that feeling extremely well. Like it's really awful. It's such very difficult. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs think that they need that edge. They need that drive. If they were to take care of themselves, as you say, if they were to detach from that identification, they wouldn't be hardcore anymore. They wouldn't be able to pull the long hours. They wouldn't be able to do the things that they think are going eventually to lead to their success. That certainly hasn't been my experience. It sounds like it hasn't been yours either. What was that process like, of like realizing that you'd actually have more success if you're willing to let things go a little bit?
I think having good role models helps a lot. Like if I heard you say that on a video 10 years ago, that would have made a really big impact on me.
Mhm.
And I think I had to see enough friends go through the struggles and enough friends where they made $100 million and they were actually generally happy and content people with balanced lives. Like having some of those people I could point to, that matters. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I think the media promotes the role models who are like, have no work-life balance or grinding it out. And like, look at Elon, right? He pitches this narrative of not really having to take care of himself and working all the time, but he has incredible success as a result. That's just one role
Mhm.
model. We aren't looking at the people who aren't that newsworthy, unfortunately. And so that's been my goal. How do I collect more people like that? And that's why I organize so many events and dinners and do a lot of this hosting. It's really my cheat code for curating the people I want to surround myself with. And it goes back to this quote that I'm sure everyone's familiar with, which is you are the average of the people you spend the most time with. And you want to really curate that closely or you'll end up going in the wrong direction. I mean, how do you think about that for yourself since, the way you think about business is so unique and so different and long-term oriented relative to the rest of Silicon Valley?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. No, I had to really cut out a lot of stuff. I used to be very in the scene and going to a lot of events. I used to run events and host events and do a lot of stuff. And what I found was actually like, yeah, as I started to do stuff that was more, it's funny, like you do something that's super contrarian, everyone thinks you're crazy. Then it works out, and then everyone thinks that they would have had that idea. You know, they loved it all along. I can't tell you how many VCs who are like super negative on lean startup once it became a thing. Were like, I remember back when, I knew you were going to be this, and I was super supportive. I'm like, that's not exactly how I remember it. Like, well, it's true with any kind of success. But then you do the next thing. And people don't, at least in my experience, people don't go, well, the last thing worked out, so probably this thing will work out too. People have the same negative reaction to the new thing that they had to the old thing, and they have to wait till it goes up. So especially like as I started to be around people who are very short term in their thinking, who kind of like have this idea that life is a zero sum game, and if for them to win, other people have to lose. Who don't really care. Like I feel like there's this like community of people that have been radicalized to the idea that the consequences of their actions don't matter as long as they turn out okay. That's like even to the point of that being a competitive advantage, like being a sociopath, having your organization like be sociopathic makes you
Mm-hmm.
strong and tough. It's a very like we're in this kind of like masculine moment or whatever where people are like rah rah like caveman idea of
Mm-hmm.
business. And to me, that is a form of weakness, not strength. I am
Mm.
not impressed. And those organizations explode spectacularly all the time. They're doing the best practices. They're being super tough. Like I talk a lot about the implosion of Silicon Valley Bank. You remember that?
Oh my God. Yeah, of
It's
course.
like I mean, that was like I was a very long weekend for me. Like helping so many companies trying to figure out like where is your money, what's going on. What's really fascinating to me is Silicon Valley Bank during the first Trump administration, they lobbied to have certain banking regulations removed so that they could make riskier bets, which they succeeded at and got the law changed, and that allowed them to make the risky bets, and that blew up the company. So like it didn't, I don't think it even took 10 years from lobbying for the thing to that exact thing, like destroying the whole company, like about all the brand equity they had built up over almost 50 years, flushed it away in a very short amount of time. And I bring that example up. They're easy to pick on, of course, but like to me, what's
Mm-hmm.
fascinating about it is during the time they were taking the actions that ultimately led to their destruction, their board was probably patting themselves on the back, being like, this is good governance. Yeah, we're being tough and strong and savvy, like getting the rules changed to make more money or whatever. And it's like, I just feel like we have this like bizarre culture in business where it's like the more you exploit, the more you're tricky, the more you do this and that, like the tougher and stronger you are, when in fact, those are the very weaknesses that eventually allow
Mm.
someone else to outcompete you. So it's like, I don't really understand. I was like, what are we doing here? Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I had to stop surrounding myself with people who are like that. Not that I cut them off and they're not my friends. I
Yeah.
got many contacts and colleagues and friends in many different factions of this debate. But like in terms of how I spend my actual day-to-day time, yeah, I spend a lot less time in the scene than I used to. And I think it's been
Yeah.
necessary for me to kind of go in these new directions.
That's totally fair. I mean, I think we all kind of get to that point. Eventually, it just sometimes you have to go through realizing that it's time to make a change, and you just I mean, in my case, I just felt in my body that something wasn't clicking and I had to make some very serious changes. And, it's ironic that it was Silicon Valley Bank of all the banks that imploded with that Silicon Valley style thinking.
Right. Should have been the most resilient. And wasn't. And the truth is, and people don't talk about this enough, I don't think. If you go back a few years before the implosion and ask people what they thought of Silicon Valley Bank, you would hear the same thing a lot, which was, well, I have to use them, but I don't really like it. Like they kind of been getting into this exploitative mindset because they had built basically a monopoly franchise, being for a long time the only bank that would bank startups and the only bank that the venture cap, like they had, they were actually very good, and they would do stuff like, if you were a founder with unrealized gains, they would like loan you money to buy a house against those gains. Now that's pretty common, but like there was a time when they were the only bank on the planet doing stuff like that for entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. So they built this incredible trust, all this mind share, and they built this incredible community. And then you could just see how it's like the MBA thinking, right? It's like, well, now that we have that privileged position, why should we have to, we can squeeze them a little more. Like where are they going to go? Right. We had no competitors. We got the monopoly, whatever. So they just started to slowly erode that trust. And I think that was a big factor. Like ultimately, at the end of the day, the venture community engineered a bank run against Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah.
So to me, I was just like, why are we destroying our own bank? Like, what are you guys doing? This is insane. But I think I still think it was a bad idea, but sometimes there's nothing you could do. Mm-hmm. But I think nobody was willing to stand up and say, guys, stop. This is a mistake. Because at the end of the day, no one really was like, who am I really going to go to bat for these guys? Well, they gone to bat for me. They had lost the trust. It was really sad.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I remember when I started inDinero, we had hundreds of businesses that I moved away from Silicon Valley Bank because the ability to connect to Silicon Valley Bank, it was just so atrociously bad. So bad. And, I wonder how many billions of dollars in deposits they lost from that whole experience. And I was this 19-year-old who didn't know anything. And it's just funny to reflect on these things and the impact.
No, the history of technology is full of these little moments where they had a product management meeting one day where I'm sure there was some engineer or somebody at Silicon Valley Bank like, guys, I think our API should be a little easier to use. I really think we could do better for, we should put some money into this. It's not super hard. Let's just do it. And you could just see the ROI thinking. People are like, well, what's the ROI of that? I don't know. It's just the right thing to do. And you see this all the time. We should open source our software, or we should support our community, or it's a crisis. We shouldn't raise prices even though we can get away with it. And there's all these little decisions companies make every day. And so, someone was like, show me the ROI. No one could show the ROI. They're like, forget that. Let's just rack up the tech debt. And so anyway, that just sits there like a unexploded ordinance until you come along. If you had called the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank, hi, I'm a 19-year-old who can't use their API, they would be like, what do I care about you? Call me back when you're big and successful. But it was too, by that time you cost them billions of dollars in deposits. It was too late. And if the API was good, I was just working just working with a startup that was trying to use Google Docs. The Google Docs API is horrendous. I'm sure many people listening to this know this. And there's a bunch of things that just you obviously ought to be able to do that you just can't do. And if you Google it, you'll find 10 years of forum threads and people being like, how can I do X? And then everyone being like, of course, there must be a way to do X. And after 50 posts, someone will be like, actually, no, there's no way to do X. And you have to go, there's there's these open feature requests on this thing for literally for 10 years. And it was just fascinating to me because okay, Google doesn't care. For 10 years, it's been not a problem. And then this founder was like, you know what, maybe I'll just make my own Google Docs. It's not that hard anymore. And I'm just every time a company does something stupid like this, some startup somewhere is high-fiving. Thank you for creating the competitive conditions for me to come and have an opportunity to compete with you. I appreciate it. So if that's true, why are we teaching people that this is the way to run a business? I don't understand it. Do you understand why? Why is it become a culture?
I know. It is, I'd say, the default culture. And it is still surprising and shocking to me that long-term, methodically building basically everything that Warren Buffett talks about very publicly, no one really follows. And I think Warren Buffett knew this even since the 80s when he started publishing his annual letter. He would talk about investing and buying companies where he would want to hold forever. He doesn't want to buy and flip like private equity. And he was so public about the strategy. And yet here we are, 30 plus years later. And it's still like maybe 10% of the people I know in the buyout and finance world have that culture. And I think there are a few dynamics at play. One is what we talked about earlier, which is just like, ego and the adrenaline rush of wanting immediate success. But I think but two, I think there's also this dynamic of, it's very difficult to break out of the existing system. So if you were an associate in private equity, you think, okay, I should start my own private equity firm. And then you raise a fund for it. And then people want, liquidity in 5 years. And you're kind of stuck on this, hamster wheel. And then same thing in the VC world. All your friends raise VC money. And you're like, all right, I'll just go raise a round. And then hopefully we don't need to raise more money. But then those VCs want to mark up their investments. So they push you to go raise more money and burn more money. And then you're stuck on the treadmill, but you didn't realize the consequences of how this would play out over a 5 or 10 year period when you first got in. And so it's really our own institutions that trap us here. And so what I think will happen, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, is you go through this round and you're on the treadmill as an entrepreneur or a fund manager or whatever you're doing. And you have to look yourself in the mirror at some point and say, do I want to continue this way, or do I want to create a completely different system and paradigm for doing business? And if you choose to go the other way, there are short-term consequences that you're going to have to grapple with. You're going to have to, grapple with your ego. You're going to have to question every assumption you made. You're going to have to surround yourself with different people, right? Like if you're a startup with executives who came from well-funded startup VC land, they want to grow at all costs versus the type of executive who is, hey, let's be methodical. Let's save money. Let's get better bang for buck. Very different mindset shift. Like you're going to have a completely different organization. So obviously it's easier to do this day one. And I think 99% of entrepreneurs, including myself, will have not started that way and will have to pivot. And I think hopefully this conversation helps give people permission to reevaluate this,
Oh, I absolutely agree. And yeah, I call it financial gravity. Basically, like the ecosystems that we operate in exhibit gravity, which is like the unconscious transmission of certain values from those that have resources to those that want resources. And a lot of companies lock other companies around them into this kind of like gravitational lock without even really realizing it. Oftentimes the values that are being transmitted aren't even the values of the people involved. It's this higher level thing. And so as the financialization of our economy has proceeded, we do this a lot more than we used to. And I think it's part of why so many people feel so helpless, even the ones who are rich and powerful. And think about how many like AI engineers and tech people who should have a lot of agency and power feel trapped. They're like literally tidally locked in these systems. So I think it's really interesting. I like the stories of people who've broken out. To me, like for all the joking people make about taking the red pill and whatever, there are these people who, for whatever reason, were able to break out of the gravitational force and do things their own way. You didn't come from money, you're surrounded by all these wealthy people, but like that's not your background. I think started out as like what seemed to me like a pretty conventional Silicon Valley story. Like you were young, you were, high agency, high drive person, came to Y Combinator, raised seed money, like seemed to me like you were on the traditional path. And then you didn't, then like something happened, like talk through what that was like. Like you pick up the story.
Sure.
I can so relate. Like you were on the cover of magazines, TechCrunch is calling you the next Mark Zuckerberg and all this stuff. At the same time that you privately know that this is all BS and your company's not doing well. Like, boy, that is so common. Thank you for being willing to admit it, because like the public accolades and the private performance of startups have basically, as far as I can tell, nothing to do with each other whatsoever.
It has no connection. I mean, I remember in 2012, Forbes and then called me and said, congrats, you're 30 under 30. And I'm thinking, my company has no money and I just laid off every single person, right? I didn't say that. I thought it. And that's when I realized, oh, wow, this is just a whole scheme for the media to get people who have buzz and newsworthiness to promote their brand. And, but yeah, I mean, I went to UC Berkeley. My parents were very generous and covered my tuition. And then after that, they said, good luck. You're on your own. You're going to build your own business and, have fun. And the Y Combinator script is you go raise VC money. You're on the treadmill. And, And I'd say I was forced into this, Eric. I was forced into this way of thinking. I didn't actually, I wouldn't have naturally gravitated towards this if things had gone
Sure.
well, up front. Like it was a straight up rocket ship. And then I think what reinforced it for me is when I was trying to pitch to VCs, it never felt like a great connection or relationship. I always felt like there's this transactional nature, this evaluative attitude from a lot of these VCs of like, like, all right, will this make me $1 billion or not? And if not, then you're useless to me. So I kind of felt that negative energy. It's very subconscious, but I knew it was there. And again, couldn't get to full body yes on wanting to work with a lot of folks. And I remember there's this one male VC who, huge ego, extremely, cocky and arrogant. And I had a meeting with him and I did not connect with him. And I said, hey, like, I don't think it's the right fit. Like, I don't think we're looking for the same thing. And like, I don't think we should continue in the process here. And I don't think he'd heard that before. I think he was so used to entrepreneurs, like pitching him and selling them and trying to get him to
Absolutely.
invest. And so then he disparaged me. He would tell people and he told one of my investors, yeah, Jess is doing some shady shit. Otherwise, why would she be scared of working with me and putting me on the board and whatever? And it's like, yeah, I was scared of having to work with someone who just wasn't culturally and philosophically aligned with how I want to do business. And the fact that this individual would go out and disparage me for opting out of his process further cemented that, for me.
Right. So absolutely proving your point.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the lesson here is when it's difficult to say no to these opportunities. It's difficult to opt out when you're desperate for money, when you think that that's the salvation. I think what's a blessing right now is we're in the age of AI where we can get so much more done with so much less money.
Oh, yeah.
And,
So cool.
it's incredible. I mean, I have one company that's, on the precipice of crossing $1 million a month in revenue, 3 full-time employees. Like that was not possible when I got started. And I told them, like, guys, with 10 employees, you could build $1 billion company and we own the whole thing. Like we don't have to raise VC money ever. And that's just so stinking cool, Eric. We're so blessed to be building now. But you have to get over the ego.
Oh, listen, it's the first time in history where Marx's famous dictum that power comes from the ownership of the means of production is actually not going to be true, because you can rent the means of production. Like people think that's funny, but actually like that's like pretty significant that like with a credit card, if you have access to like a few $100s worth of credit, you can access like truly world-class production facilities and build stuff that is on a par with what a multinational company can do. Our socioeconomic systems are not set up for the explosion of creativity that this is going to enable. It's going to be wild.
Yeah, I'm very stoked about that.
Okay, so take me back. So you're going through this process. You're meeting VCs. It's funny. I know there's several people listening who are like, "Oh, I know what that VC is. I know who you're talking about." And I'm like, "No, you don't, because it's more than one person it could be."
There are many people like this.
That is a very common thing. I can tell you several people who would act and think like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's no point in naming names even, because this is like a lot of them,
Look around. Yeah. So you listen, if you don't know who we're talking about, like just go spend some time in the industry and you'll find out, unfortunately, very soon. Mm-hmm. But I think it's really interesting so I think a lot of people, when confronted with something like that, would assume that they're the one who's doing something wrong. Like I know quite a few people who in those moments compromise their values, compromise their integrity, and just be like, well, I need to conform. And when I teach people, I'm asking like, how do I embody a corporate purpose or some kind of mission into their organization? Even just to have a strategy, any kind of long-term strategy, mission, value strategy, all these things are about what are you not willing to do? Like, what would you rather go out of business than do? And once you clarify what that is, it can be easier, write it down, be clear about it. It's like, oh yeah, I would not, like there's certain kinds of compromise I would rather be bankrupt than do. But most people don't think about that consciously. And most people in the situation you're in are so eager for fame and riches and fun. I'm not sure exactly what they think they're going to get out of it, but their ego is telling them, I got to have this status, this safety, this success. I'll do whatever it takes. And that includes compromising those values. So like, why not? Like, you didn't go in trying to be different. Like, what do you think actually gave you the courage and the insight to say, all right, it's not me, it's them, and I'll go a different way?
Yeah, well, I had so many of these terrible interactions, not so different from the one I just shared with you. I've probably had dozens of interactions like that, and it never felt good. And I have a mom who never went to college. She bootstrapped her own clothing and fashion business.
Oh,
And
cool.
she's like, you don't need any investors. Just like, you don't need any, like every time she has a Google alert on my name and anytime anything gets published, she gets so upset. She's like, Jess, stay under the radar. Like, make sure nobody knows who you are. It's dangerous.
Mhm.
And this morning she texted me and she's like, hey, how are you dealing with all the stalkers you have? I'm like, oh man. So she's just so like, she's still a mom. And so I think having that's been really supportive. And, I think also, moving to LA and having more entrepreneur friends who built businesses with cash flow changed my attitude a lot. And I started to appreciate how most of my stress was around not having enough money, around not have, so then the goal became not wealth and riches and fame, but just how do I create tranquility? How do I create peace? And then I think I had another, notable incident where, I had a boyfriend who served as a Marine and he passed away. He died by suicide in 2021. And, and then when that happened, I was definitely in a very raw state of mind. And I took about 8 months completely off from work, give or take. And I had a lot of time to reflect and think about what do I really want? What really matters in life? Like, what's the point of the work? What's like, why do I do what I do? And how could I do things differently? If I have another chance of life today and, I could do anything I want, what would I do? And not working in that time and having the full peace and quiet to just journal and talk to my friends and reflect. That was powerful for me, Eric. That's really powerful for me. And, and then, yeah, I came up with my own version of the list of what you just described, which is like, what am I unwilling to do? Like I'd rather not work. I'd rather be bankrupt than ... And just being really true to those values. And, and I think also just seeing all my, I think through that period, I came to realize that so much more of happiness is driven from knowing who's got your back during tough times and who are your real allies, and to not have adversaries like in work and industry. It just makes life a lot better, Eric. It's just, everything's just so much more elegant. So I could go on and on and on about that. But it's not to say, I think there's a flip side here that we should talk about, which is, it's okay to suffer. It's okay to have challenges. It's okay for bad things to happen. And life and business does not always have to be a kumbaya. Everything's amazing. That's not only unrealistic. I think that's also a toxic attitude as well.
Totally.
And
how many startups have you met over the years that are crushing it like the day before they go out of business? I'm like, I get that update like on Wednesday. It's like, how's it going? I'm crushing it. And then the next day, I'm like, they're bankrupt. And I call them up like, hey, did you have when you were crushing it, you had no inkling that you were about to go out of business? I'm like, well, but I think we have this toxic culture where it's like, you're supposed to be projecting positivity and that you're in control at all times, or else something bad's going to happen to you. But that inauthenticity, like that dishonesty, like prevents people from being your allies because then they can't really tell what's actually going on.
Yeah. And I think that having to project confidence and positivity, we've been brainwashed into having to do that because there are many people who do not react well when things are going wrong. So
True.
let's say you're the startup founder and I've got you, Eric, as one of my investors. I can trust you. I can be honest. And then I've got the individual I mentioned before who is going to be breathing down my neck and accusing me of being like the worst CEO ever. And like, I want to ruin your career if this business goes, belly up, like stuff like that, which is just very, very unnecessary. And unfortunately, in the female founder community, we talk about this very openly. I know so many women who've been psychologically crushed and abused in the boardroom when things go wrong. So they decide, you know what, I'm just going to like have a very solid presence and command the confidence. And then they come back to their girlfriends on Friday night and they're crying because they're so miserable and like, this sucks. And like, I've got bulldogs on my board. And, it's just like so difficult to watch, and I've never had board members who I couldn't get rid of in any of my companies. Because I was unsuccessful at raising VC money, not because I was a master strategist here.
Yeah.
And
But talk about that. In corporate governance circles, it is considered a bad practice that the CEO can fire their board members. And among entrepreneurs, it is considered a best practice. And so like, talk about what it's like to because people say, oh, if the board's not breathing down your neck and treating you like, raking you over the coals all the time, then how is there any accountability for your startup? Which I always think is so funny because like only people who've never actually run a startup can be worried about that. I'm like, the market provides plenty of accountability. We don't need any extra, it's hard enough. We don't need these people yelling at us. But talk about that. Like, how did you find accountability and partnership in a situation where you were in control and not your board?
Yeah, I think that in my situation, I'm not the CEO of any of these companies that I've co-founded. I bring in amazing partners, co-founders, and CEOs to steer the ship on a day-to-day basis. And because I've been in their seat, I know, I think, okay, what would I want if I was in their shoes? I would want someone who's supportive, who helps me think about the right things, but does it from a place of like genuine love and care and reminds me that I can build for the long run. Like I don't need to cut corners. I can be honest about problems and Jess will have my back. And if any other shareholder or employee or, stakeholder was negative, Jess would make sure that they were held in line. That's my job. And I think in that environment, it cultivates more success. And that doesn't fit into the traditional framework of like you need to do this or else. Right. It's like the negging culture of board governance. I'm not a huge fan of. But I've had to come to this conclusion myself just from observing the opposite from my other friends and hearing from people who are CEOs of all the famous unicorns that you and I use on a daily basis. I ask them, hey, how helpful is your board? Like, what is good and what is bad about having Kleiner or Sequoia or, Andreessen and the head honcho of the firm on your board? And it's often very negative. Like, yeah, this person's not only unhelpful, it's value destructive, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And yet these are famous VCs that you and I read about in the news on a daily basis. Mind-boggling. But why does it have to take me having a private friendship and a private dinner conversation with this unicorn founder billionaire to learn these secrets,
I find it just so fascinating that the public discourse about these topics and the private discourse have nothing in common. And I remember writing a blog post like a long time ago called Stop Lying on Stage, because like it was just very clear that people are not telling the truth in these public stories. And I came to it because Paul Graham or somebody was saying that one of the reasons to do Y Combinator is that when people come and speak at the Y Combinator dinner, they tell the truth about all this cool stuff that you can't learn any other way. And I was like, it just struck me one day. I was like, wait, he's like bragging about that as a competitive advantage for Y Combinator, which I think is true. It is true. But those same people talk publicly all the time. So it's like, wait a second, are you saying that the people that come and talk at these dinners are all liars, like in public? Like really, that's what we're doing here?
Yeah, but unfortunately, that is largely the case.
Is absolutely irreconcilably broken. And this point about governance, I think, is extremely key, because people join boards and they don't really know what their job is, and they get acculturated into the idea that their job is to bring accountability on behalf of shareholders, which to me, it's like we're indoctrinating them into like how to kill the golden goose. Like as efficiently as possible. It's like, kind of sharpen your knives and get a hatchet. Instead of like, wait a minute, we have these beautiful golden egg producing miracle machines how do we feed and nurture and grow them? And how do we like block and tackle and prevent? So like if someone was thinking about joining a startup board right now and you wanted to teach them what is good governance, what would you tell them?
Great question. I'd say before we get into what is good governance, I think you have to every company has to determine for themselves what are their actual goals and like what is considered good governance for each company, because it's going to be a little bit different for each one. So for example, a VC or a private equity fund manager joining the board of one company might say it's great governance. We have to maximize EBITDA, short-term results, because our mandate is to flip this company in 3 years from now and for the highest possible price, right? So that could be good governance for one company, and good governance for, LTSC might be like, hey, for the next 30 years, how do we maximize the value, for all of our stakeholders, not just shareholders, but for our employees and the community and for our clients. And, so that definition for your company, Eric, is going to be completely different. And I think what we miss is we don't establish those ground rules ahead of time, and we don't interview board members based on that criteria. Like when we hire an employee, we think, okay, like I need someone who's this type of a culture fit with this type of skill set. With board members, we look more to their resume, their connections, and we're not very detailed when it comes to this cultural alignment, the goals of the organization, what is good governance for this organization specifically. True. And then also, what is helpful governance is a separate question from what is good governance. Helpful governance being like, what does the CEO and the executive team need most? Do they need to be like yelled at and, have a finger pointed at them? I think that's what a lot of people think they have to do, when really a more successful outcome would be, they actually need to be like encouraged, and they're stressed out of their mind already. So, they're not thinking very creatively or outside of the box because they're in whack-a-mole mode as the CEO or entrepreneur, and actually we need to take a different approach. So I really hope my ask for the world is we have more of these conversations up front ahead of time and be more thoughtful.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think a lot of founders are quite naive about it. And it's what I call the independent director problem, that people often bring independent directors onto their board because that's good governance. And they do it based on their resume and like references from their investors, like who is really good. And then they wind up basically being in a minority on their own board. Independent directors are by definition not accountable to anybody. And all of a sudden now you have this like group of people on your board that may not align with you around your mission, and you can't get rid of them. There's no way for them to be held accountable for their behavior. And unfortunately, if you think back, I actually already gave the answer of like what the problem is. I snuck it into the way I phrased it. Because like, who do they really care about having a good opinion of them? Well, who did you ask for a reference when you were trying to find an independent director? You asked investors. So if you want to if you want to get a job as an independent director, you better not piss the investors off. So actually, they wind up being ludicrously pro-investors. So like one of the big problems in corporate governance is trying to figure out how do we create accountability structures, things like mission trusts and the Anthropic LTPT. There are these structures now where there are, in fact, somebody who's there to hold all the directors accountable for their fidelity to the mission, not just for short-term shareholder benefit. And those companies, it's just a really different, like the board culture has to be really different just because of that structure. So I hope more people will start to take this issue a little more seriously.
That's beautifully said. Yeah, we don't really talk about this stuff as much. It's not sexy to talk about,
It's so boring. Yeah, it's like, governance. Most founders, I'm shocked to the extent to which most founders who have like an operating company, sometimes even like a profitable company, I'm the first person that's ever talked to them about their own governance. And I'm like, who set this company up for you? Did they not talk to they just said they would set it up standard. I'm like, oh, standard? It's like saying like, what's your technology stack? It's like, I don't know. My CTO said it's standard. It's like, you should know a little more about it than just if it's standard or not. Like maybe it's really wild.
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, I think all this comes back also to you as a founder when you're starting the company. Like, what are your goals? Like, is your goal really? Because people say, "Oh, my goal is to build $1 billion company." It's like, but to what end? Like, what's the why behind that? And if you do a 5 whys analysis, like, what are you really trying to solve for in your life? And maybe like that's actually the wrong goal. And I think a lot of my friends realized that a few years in, that was actually never the goal. And it was
Yeah, it's
actually a
like
trap.
it's easy to prove it to people because you're like, oh, is every possible way of making $1 billion equally good to you? And people will say yes to that. Then you're like, but couldn't you rob a bank and make $1 billion? They're like, well, not that. It's like, well, couldn't you start a Ponzi scheme? Well, not that. Couldn't you kill people for money? Not that. It's like, okay, actually, you're very picky. You're very particular. You want to make $1 billion, but only by what? And then usually what they'll say, well, only by accomplishing the mission of this company. It's like, okay, so how about instead of making the goal $1 billion, like that's the exhaust that comes out the engine. Why don't we make the goal the thing you actually want to do? That's funny.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. But yeah, I mean, that's why I come back to, you know, this idea of revisiting what is our, 30-year personal ideal life looking like. And so I have this whole document I maintain where I write down what do I want my life to look like when I'm 50, 65, 80, what I have been proud of. And, yeah, there's all this stuff. It actually doesn't come up on that as much. It's really in the short term that I think about these things more for some reason. And I don't know too many other entrepreneurs who are clearly writing down and articulating what their life looks like at 65. But it changes a lot of what you end up doing in the short term if you do that.
Yeah. I certainly found having kids change my perspective about that because I was like, what am I? Because I could. It was easier for me to imagine my kids asking me when they grow up, hey, when this thing was going on in the world, what were you doing about it? And if I'm like, well, I was optimizing database latency for CRM improve. It's just like if I had some like lame answer, I'd be like, I don't think I would feel good about that. Or like, oh, I found a clever way to sell cigarettes, more effectively or something. It's just like, really? The world was on fire and that's what you were working on. And so I think people sometimes hear that and they think, oh, I got to go join a nonprofit or I have to go into activism or whatever. I think one of the things that also is interesting to me about your approach is the extent to which you've been willing to take really big swings at solving like quite fundamental problems about the world, but doing it through the lens of for-profit company building, and through for-profit investing, not these other tools. So I'm curious if you could talk about that. Like, I think to me, it goes part and parcel with having stepped off the treadmill, started to like think about your life in these long-term ways. But on the other hand, there must be days when you wake up and be like, what the hell am I doing? Sinking all this money into this absolutely hopeless and impossible task. Like, right?
Yeah. So like today I was thinking about that, like we're dumping millions of dollars into making fruit flies living twice as long, which maybe will help my dog live longer. Maybe if I'm lucky, which will maybe lead to humans in like, the small probability, right? And
the so-called two miracle problems. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I have a barbell approach to how I think about my life. On one hand, I have the things that I believe are really interesting and cool businesses where I have fun with it and where I think I'm doing something great. But let's be honest, they exist more with the purpose of generating cash flow and making money.
Give us some examples of things in that part of the barbell, and then you can give us some contrasting examples on the other side.
I have a litigation finance platform business. I have a alternative esoteric alts platform business that I'm building there. And they're investing in things like life settlement. So buying life insurance policies or merchant cash advances or, and creating a whole marketplace for this. So that's kind of one side of the barbell. And then there's inDinero and then, on and on and on. And then on the other side, I've got, a company that's working on the longevity stuff I just discussed, a company that's working to use bioelectricity to normalize cancer cells. So instead of trying to kill cancer, how do you just make it so that cancer doesn't act like cancer?
That's so cool.
I have another company I'm stoked about that's around, I think this one actually has a really good high probability of success, which is around, overcoming drug resistance. So if you have leukemia or cancer and you have to take some drugs to keep it at bay, over time, the drugs degrade in their efficacy, unfortunately. And once they fully degraded, then you can't take any more and you will succumb to the disease or cancer. And so if you pair your drug with our drug, then maybe you'll not have that problem anymore. So this is the kind of stuff that I love working on the other side of the barbell. But, these are money pits until they're not. And, And I realized that if I just funded academic research, it would never really see the light of day. If I created a for-profit company, I could bring in more capital. I could bring in, you know, industry experts and have a different cultural element to thinking about this. And I really like that approach, especially in bio, especially as it relates to life science stuff. And yeah, I've had so many people say you shouldn't be doing this right now. Wait till you're 50, wait till you're a billionaire, wait till, you have more cycles, like every excuse that could possibly be come up with to
I've
not
heard
do
every one of
this.
those excuses. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Right. And then I figured I'd rather just do it now, make the mistakes and suffer. And because I'm learning so much now, no matter what happens, whether we succeed or fail, I know that over the course of my lifetime, I will make much more impact as it relates to life science work that I'm doing and investing in, because I was willing to fail, because I have this 30-year time horizon on it. And that's honestly what convinced me to take the plunge anyway, even though it's felt like premature, so to speak, in my career, you know?
I can totally relate. Yeah. Oh, and I'm glad that you did. I think putting it off, like if you're passionate about something, putting it off is never a good idea.
I mean, we met under this context too, right? We were both busy trying to, pay the bills and build our businesses. And then COVID happened. And then we both sprung into,
Totally.
crazy
And I
mode.
really felt
Yeah.
like in my life, there was two kinds of people. There was the people that like jumped in to figure out what to do and like got active. And there are people that were like waiting for some mysterious moment when they would know what to do. Like they just were paralyzed by the fact that this seemed like too big of a problem. And a lot of people, I hear this all the time, even now for the things I do now, but in COVID especially, people would say, but what's the point of doing that? The problem seems too big. And it's like, well, there's a person, we can save one life right now. What's the point of doing that? The person's alive. They were otherwise going to be dead. So that's at least we know for sure we can do that. Then we can work on the other things too. And sometimes when you're in motion, like I can't say that everything we tried. Think about how many things we tried. Did everything work? No. Did we ultimately solve the problem? Not really. Like the COVID response was globally mismanaged due to forces that were way above our pay grade and way out of our control. We did what we could, and I think and a lot of good stuff came out of it. Even though
I agree.
No, we did not solve it was not a complete victory. And I think having watched too many superhero movies, like maybe people's brains have gotten hard.
It's like if I can't have full victory, I won't even try. And it's like, actually, it's not so binary.
It's really not.
And we still learned a lot. We grew a lot. We met amazing people. We became friends from that whole thing. So there are so many positive things that come out of just trying, even if it doesn't work out. And that really made a lasting impression on me, like I still keep in touch with so many of the friends we made, collaborating with them at, midnight on, the weekends. Like, wow, like you're really committed to this, like irrationally so, like that creates a special bond.
Oh yeah. And there's people from that time that like, even though I've actually never met them in person, we only ever met in that context. Like I feel like they're my brother for life,
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. We were in the foxhole together. We did what we could.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies were formed out of those relationships. Like a lot of good stuff has come out of it, even though the actual thing was quite dark. Speaking of mutual friends, our mutual friend Ben was telling me that when I had you on, I just absolutely had to ask you about your superpower, which is talent identification. Because like so much of the story you're telling is about your ability to find partners to do all these different projects with you and to enter into your vision, but then to really run with it. I know so many people who have plenty of resources, but who really struggle with this particular bit, because as you say, when you get rich, people want things from you. So like there's all kinds of people who want to take your money and do stuff with it. How do you avoid that problem? And how have you been able to like identify and recruit so many really talented people to be part of this umbrella? What's your secret sauce?
Yeah, I'll share when it goes well and when it's like A+, and I'll also share when it doesn't go well and how it still doesn't go well for me all the time, because that's the honest truth. When it goes great, a lot of these people I've never met before. I think the myth is, you're successful, you have an amazing network, and then you have all these people who are willing to partner with you on stuff. And if you just cherry pick the best ones, that's what I hear about from other people. My reality is that the people who are in my immediate network are often not the best person to pursue a new project with. So I'm starting a company around, longevity, let's say, or I'm starting a new company around, like a new fintech AI company. Like I might have like someone who's so and who's a good friend of mine, but I send out my recruiters. I've got 3 full-time recruiters at Maui, and we will talk to dozens and dozens of potential people who could be the right fit for this company. And they have conversations. I get on Zoom. I meet them in person. Eventually I'll spend a full day or 2 days with finalist candidates. And even then we're doing 90-day plus trial periods where they're going to keep their existing, commitments. They're often, in one case, our CEO, he had sold his last company for $650 million and he was drinking wine and enjoying his life. And he's like, should I leave retirement? And he's ended up being spectacular to work with. But most of the time they have a full-time commitment where they are COO or, president of a company. They're often not CEO of something. And they want to move into that role. Not always, but often. And I say, don't leave what you're doing, but nights and weekends, let's collaborate. Let's just see if the magic is flowing, if it feels like a full body yes on all sides, and if it's clicking. And I think it takes 90 plus days to get there. And most of the time, the 90-day process does not work out and it blows up in a very, not spectacular way. It's just like, hey, it's just not the right fit. Like you got other commitments or, you lost interest or on our side, I don't feel, that this can be a lifelong relationship. I'm getting the feeling that you're treating this like a job, like more transactional, and that doesn't work for me. I'd rather not even launch this project if that's the case. And that's a big reason that I don't move forward. And I can't tell that during the interview process. I have all these people. I'm like, all right, it's a hell yeah. And then the 90-day try before you buy period sets in. And then, it's about at the 4-week mark that things fall apart, I would say.
Yeah. There are people who are just really good at interviewing for jobs. That's actually a skill that some people really have honed. And so, but like being able to suss out if someone has a transactional point of view, like, we talk about gravity before. Transactions are the mechanism by which gravity is transmitted. So somebody who has that transactional philosophy, who like sees the gravitational forces in the world and says, oh, great, like I can use that to my advantage. Like that, there's some people that really is their philosophy of business, and that you can't interview for that. That's very, very difficult to suss out. But in practice, you'll feel it because they see you as an object to help them accomplish the things that they want to do, rather than as a partner, rather than as part of this larger vision.
Yeah, exactly. And also people could have been super successful with what they did before and have great references and crushed it, but it's just not the right, energetic match or chemistry. And that's totally okay. That happens all the time.
Have you had people lose it because these are very successful people. You have people who are like not used to having it not go well, and therefore like are upset that it didn't go forward?
Yeah, this happens all the time. I'd say, probably on a monthly basis. It's okay. I mean, they don't necessarily like lose it where they go crazy, but where they're really upset. Yeah. They're sad. And I say, look, I'm sad too. Like I really wanted this to work out. You're amazing and you're going to build a great company. And it's just not the right fit for the container that I have here at Maui. Cause, like I'm doing this for fun too. I'm doing this because like I'm excited by it. And maybe on their side, they need to pay for their kids' private school, and they have different goals. And I could tell that drives how they do things in a way that just, I know won't sit well with me. And, as soon as I see it, I can't unsee it.
Well, that's definitely true. Well, the reason I ask is I think there's plenty of people who listening to this who like, you've just described their worst nightmare. They're like, wait a minute, you're telling me that once a month I have to have this kind of difficult conversation with like some powerful man who, is not getting the job.
It's usually a guy too. It's usually, someone who's perfect resume.
I intuited from what you were saying, unfortunately. Yeah. So like, I think there's plenty of people who like wouldn't do it just because that sounds really unpleasant. So like, how do you manage? I feel like part of what the boldness of what this is you've just been like, yeah, there's all these unpleasant and crazy things about it. So what? I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's unusual. So yeah, talk about like where does that come from? How have you been able to manage the downsides of it? Or like, why are you willing? You don't have to be doing this. You could be doing a lot of things. Why this? So like, why are you willing to put yourself in this like unpleasant situation so regularly?
Yeah,
What's
I think
wanting you to do it?
that's a great question. I think that I get upset and sad, but it's very fleeting when this happens. And I'm still just like very driven again I think about what is the long-term goal I'm working towards. And if I can make tiny improvements along the way, just get a little bit better each time, then I feel satisfied, even if it's hard. So to directly answer your question, I'm getting better at managing my own nervous system. So I have this coach who all she does is help me manage my nervous system and figure out what are the tools for shifting my energy as quickly as possible. And this is distinctly different from working with a therapist. Like a talk therapist you could complain about and bitch to. No, like how do you just manage your emotional state and your energy as soon as something triggers you? So that's one. And then two, I want to mention this concept I've been thinking a lot about called kodawari. It's a Japanese concept and phrase, and I think about this as meaning the pursuit of excellence, even in micro, tiny, incremental steps. Am I getting a little bit better? And so every time we have something that does not work out, we bring in a CEO candidate for a company, and it's like it goes great until it doesn't go great during the trial period. I sit down with my talent team and everyone else. I'm like, all right, like what did we learn here? What went wrong? How could we have caught this earlier? And there's always a nugget or insight where it's like, oh man, like we could have figured this out 3 weeks earlier if we had looked into XYZ. And I think because I have so many more reps at this and because I have failed so many more times at this, I think that's been the secret sauce to being able to improve my framework and my process to then get better at it and to make fewer mistakes. So it's like the success, you can't take away the failures from the success. It's all but the same thing.
Yeah. Well, and seeing it as reps, I think that's also really powerful. Like people think, okay, I failed. And you say, well, how could you prevent the failure? They're like, no, it couldn't have been prevented. But yeah, your question is not how could it be prevented, but how could we have found it a little sooner? Like every week sooner you find it, those small changes, if you do it over and over again, those small changes compound.
Yeah.
Whenever I teach people the Japanese Chinese board game of Go, it's played on the grid.
Yeah, Go.
They have a proverb that you should endeavor to lose your first 1,000 games as quickly as possible.
Wow.
And
beautiful.
Which is super cool. But I've also found when teaching people, I tell them that proverb now, and like certain people are like, okay, well then let's get it over with. And they'll blitz like okay, they'll do the teaching exercise. Like they'll want to blitz through the failures as quickly as they can. And quite a few people like get really paralyzed. And even though they've heard the proverb, even they understand, they'll still like draw out every loss like quite extensively. And I'm like, hey, at this rate, 1,000 losses are going to take us 3 or 4 years. Like we gotta go. But I basically found that is like very predictive of whether they will stick with it and ultimately learn or not, whether they can be comfortable with entering into a process where they know they're going to lose a lot of times in order to gain the larger objective, the thing they actually do want, which is mastery at the end.
Yeah, that's well said. I think it also, it's soothing to know that even when you fail though and make a mistake here, it's not fatal. Like these are not, it's not the end of your career when you lose your first 1,000 games of Go, or when you're trying to hire an executive and it doesn't go well. Will you move slower? Yes, you might move slower, or you might move faster because you didn't hire the wrong people and because you're learning along the way.
Well, or you got off the treadmill because you couldn't raise VC, and that turns out to have been the key to all the success that happens later. I think that's like a really beautiful illustration of that idea.
It's the Chinese proverb of like the Chinese farmer story. Yeah.
Tell it. Go ahead and tell it. I know, but yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to truncate it just for everyone listening. Where Chinese farmer, it's like when good things happen, is it really good? Like, oh yeah, this horse wanders in And
Yeah,
then
we'll
it's like, oh,
see. We'll see.
we'll see. And then like you fall off the horse, like, the kid breaks his leg. Oh no, it's so bad. Well, we'll see. Maybe it's not so bad. And then the army comes into town and drafts all the people, except
All
for
the
him because he
able-bodied
broke his
boys. Yeah.
leg. Exactly. It's like, so maybe that's not so bad. And, I think that same story applies to, what happened in my situation. I couldn't raise VC money. Was this good or bad? Like I, was unsuccessful at hiring a CEO for this business. Well, and so that was actually not the right idea, not aligned with what I wanted to do 6 months later. And I got bored anyway. Right. So it's like everything I do, I try to look at it with that story in mind. And I usually come to the conclusion that the bad things were actually good things.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard when you're going through it in a startup to realize that. But I think it's one of the most underrated superpowers in entrepreneurship. Like if you can achieve real equanimity about what's happening, doesn't mean you're not hardcore anymore. It doesn't mean you're not going to work hard. It just means you're not freaking out at every little thing. And therefore you're able to see much more clearly what is in fact happening. You're more in touch with reality. So you have more chance of finding things that are going to work.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So it's beautiful. I really hope that more people eventually come to this way of thinking. And, I'm glad that we get to share this experience together and, do this together.
Yeah, me too. Before you go, can I just ask you a quick lightning round of a couple things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I read somewhere that you said your favorite interview question, this like 3-part interview question that was your favorite. Can you talk about it?
A 3-part interview. Could you refresh me on?
Yeah. I wasn't sure if it was like you say it all the time or I need to refresh you. We'll get it out. Okay. So you said that your favorite interview question, I have to look over here. What's the hardest you've ever worked in your life? What's your most lofty ambition? And what are you doing for self-development?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the general vibe and direction is, I want to see, on one hand, I want to see how grounded they are. I want to see what their priorities are and what matters to them. But more importantly, I want to just see their general attitude towards, improving themselves. And I think through asking these questions, we could figure out how authentic one is, how much posturing there is. So I really, I still love those questions, even though what I'm looking for is different from what I think someone thinks I'm looking for. Like, I'm not looking for someone to say I sleep under my desk and I work 100 hours a week, actually, even though I ask it in a way that makes it appear that that would be the ideal answer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it was very helpful to have a question like that has a leading answer to see whether people will just give you the leading answer or not. Tells you a lot about the kind of person you're talking to.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And these are questions where I think people generally gravitate towards an answer versus having like some nuance to it. I would answer by saying, I work really hard. I love working, but also like I'm working with great people. It doesn't feel as, crazy as it did when I was in my 20s. So you kind of get the story out of people. And, but yeah, when things are, when I'm on a crunch deadline, I have no problem jumping in and doing whatever it takes. And then I would have talked about the story of how you and I were collaborating, for example, during COVID. And, that was something I was passionate about, but it felt like a calling. It didn't feel like working. And, I just want to pull these anecdotes out of people. It's the anecdotes that matter more than like I work really hard. Without context, that doesn't really tell me anything.
Totally.
Yeah.
You've talked a lot about being a female founder, and you were even saying earlier about like that there are these like private groups where female founders can compare notes about the crazy stuff that they have to encounter. But you've also talked about how being a female founder has like also been a source of advantage in your career, which I thought was really interesting. Like that's something that is not normally talked about. And so I was just curious, like what, you've seen the highs and the lows of it. Obviously you have a lot of peers and colleagues. You've heard all kinds of horror stories, I'm sure far more even than I have. What's your reflection on the kind of gender politics of entrepreneurship and just like, what's it been like to be, not in the dominant common pattern in all these circles that you interact in?
Yeah, I love the female founder community. I've got a group I put together called Badass Female Founders. It's a few hundred women. It's on a WhatsApp group and email list. So if anyone wants to join that, just send me a message on my LinkedIn. And then I'll have someone on my team add you to the group. And then we also have a conference that we're throwing in Palm Springs in April every year, the Female Founders Conference. Very creative naming, right? But it's kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous, because I think a lot of women share the common stories of, being whiplashed by, their cocky, annoying, arrogant, male investors. And, there's a lot of sexual harassment, sexual assaults from, investors, a lot of, really terrible, I would
It's
argue
outrageous.
borderline criminal behavior. And so what I'm starting to put together is another private support group for women who have been, negatively impacted in that way, just want to have a voice. And also if they need legal support or actual practical support, we're offering that free of charge to female founders.
That's great.
And so, we have our list. We know who the bad actors are and we want to support people. We know the playbook for how to deal with every single person. And, that's one of our services.
Well, I'm sorry we live in a world where that service is necessary, but I'm glad somebody's providing it.
Yeah. It's just, someone's got to offer it. And, I didn't want the female founders to just be like, oh, woe is me. We just take shit from people. It's like, no, like if you're being, bullied, then, there are going to be legal consequences, for your adversary that we will see through. So that's a fun other side project of ours.
That's great.
Yeah.
You gave an interview where you said that a key moment for you was when you decided, I had to quote this exactly so I don't get it wrong. You said you had to go full YOLO mode where there's just no need to play it safe. So just talk about what was it like to go? I feel like there's so many people who wish they could do that or who've fantasized about it or combat, but you actually did it. What was it like going full YOLO mode in your life?
Yeah. I mean, I don't go full YOLO on minute by minute, every minute of the day, every day of the year. It's selective, right? But I think after my boyfriend in 2021 passed away, I gave myself permission to fully just do whatever I wanted to do in business and life. And I definitely took it to an extreme, and
what did that look like? Give us some examples. What were your YOLO actions?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing is I decided I would never be operating CEO of a company ever again. And I was willing to let that part of my identity be a permanent fixture of the past. I decided to not really care about what the internet thought of me. So, bought a Lamborghini, bought a jet, did all the kind of stupid things that, immature rich people do. Finally decided to sell the Lambo, by the way, a few days ago. I decided it was too lavish,
that era is over,
too flashy, and does not represent who I am today. So it had to go. It's just stuff like that where it's more of an attitude and it's more of a statement of all right, I'm just going to do whatever I want to do and consequences be damned of people criticizing me or looking at me in a certain way. I named my investment company Mawe, right? Who names their company after themselves? Unless you're arrogant, egotistical person. I'm like, yeah, fuck it. I'll just do it anyway because it's funny. How often do you see a woman naming their company after themselves? So that's another just example of the general attitude of full YOLO. Yeah, but you got to hone it in a bit too.
Well, I wasn't going to ask this, but I just feel like on behalf of I know there are listeners now who are just you got to ask, did you get blowback from that?
Was it? Of course.
Yeah. What was it like? What did people I feel like people have this fear that if they step out and they did something like that, people would say there's something horrible would happen. You're acting like it wasn't that bad. So what was it actually like? What was the blowback you got? And it seems like you have a level of permission you've given yourself that most people would dream about having. So you give us a little report from the future. What's it like if you let that stuff go?
I mean, honestly, I wanted to test what the blowback would be because I knew that the consequences wouldn't be that bad. And also I just didn't give a shit, I had exited out of my companies and my boyfriend had just died and I literally gave no shits about what anyone thought. Okay. So the stakes were really low. So I just want to caveat everything with that. And then, I post about this on my LinkedIn and I still post every week on my LinkedIn with very open shares. And I had one post that talked about this whole concept, and how I talked about how, yeah, like I have difficult parts of my life too. It's not all gravy. And it was taken out of context, and some tabloids, made fun of me for that. Like Jess Mah, like who like has this like fancy life, talks about how hard her life is. But it talked about how I had really struggled, in the aftermath of my, then boyfriend, taking his life, right? That was a very generally difficult experience for me. And I was trying to show how you could have good and you could have bad at the same time. But of course, the tabloids love to take that perspective and write about that, and then ended up, thousands of people on Twitter saying how Jess Mah is this terrible, entitled person. And all my girlfriends were like, oh my God, the internet's blowing up about how awful a person you are. Like, how do you feel about it? And I just laughed so hard, Eric. I'm like, this is great. I'm being, shat on by these random Twitter trolls. Like, I made it now. So I think that's part of the experience. And I think that's difficult for people. My girlfriends who brought that up, they're like, oh my God, I'd have a heart attack if I was on the other side of it. And they saw that I laughed about it and found it entertaining and like part of this interesting experience to observe how the internet works. Cause I knew it's not personal. Like if you don't have my phone number, if you're not my friend, I don't really care about what you think. Like you're going to post this on the internet and I'm sure I'll get a bunch of shitty comments from people. And it's like, whatever. Like post away. I don't really care.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've had to deal with that yourself as well. Like, like just people who are hating, but that's really more of a reflection of how they feel about themselves and their own situation.
Totally.
It's never actually.
That's the best advice anyone ever gave me about that is if someone gives you feedback, they're telling on themselves. It has nothing to do with you. Like they're telling you, they're revealing something about themselves to you, which you can do what you want with. And like, if you're interested, like if you're showing them a product and you want their feedback, it can be interesting to learn how they feel about the product. But if they're talking about something that you don't need to know that about their life, it's like, I don't care. It's like, well, so what? Yeah. Okay, good. You're upset about that thing. Thank you for letting me know. That's good to know.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope you're able to cure that illness. But in the meantime, I'm going to go on and live my life.
That's beautifully said. And I think the more we have practice and reps observing these things, Eric, it makes it easier to just live life in a more authentic way. That's real freedom. More than financial freedom is the spiritual freedom.
All right, I want to ask you one last thing, which is such a small one, but it caught my attention. You talked about going to a computer camp when you were 10 years old.
Yeah.
And that immersion was actually really important for you. You were saying, I think in the context of more women need to get into programming earlier. But just talk about like why was that immersion important? Why do you think more people should send their kids to computer camp? Like just what was that like for you?
I loved computer camp. Yeah, I learned how to program at computer camp. And my dad, actually, kudos to him for picking out a camp for me. And he was an engineer. He studied electrical engineering, and he thought it was important for me to have that type of structured environment to learn, because I was trying to self-teach myself programming with these textbooks at home as a 10-year-old, which is really difficult to do unless you have like an actual instructor or tutor. And sure. I think even though we have AI now and you could go to, Replit or Lovable or whatever, and you don't necessarily need to know how to code, there's this element of learning structured thinking and how does this actually work behind the scenes, and like how do you debug problems and deconstruct a problem and get to the root of a problem. Programming teaches that skill set in a low stakes way. And also creates patience. Like, oh man, I'm frustrated. I can't solve this problem. It's actually a beautiful spiritual teacher. And my dad saw that, encouraged me to go, and they were generous to pay for me to go to programming camp for many, many years. And then I went to science camp, and it was just a blast. I had way more fun doing that than I think I would have doing sports camp or anything else.
I can definitely relate to that. Well, thank you for taking the time, the one and only Jess Mah.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks for sharing so openly and honestly. And I think people are going to take a lot out of this conversation. So thanks for doing it.
Great to chat with you.
You've been listening to The Eric Ries Show. The Eric Ries Show is produced by Jordan Bornstein and Kiki Garthwaite. Research by Tom White and Melanie Rehak. Visual design by Reform Collective. Title theme by DB Music. I'm your host, Eric Ries. Thanks for listening and watching. See you next time.